Hello and welcome to the Franz Van Cat interview. Nearly 2 years ago, noted American feminist Anne-Marie Slaughter created a storm when she went public and explained why she had stood down from a prestigious job with the US State Department. Now, juggling a highly demanding position with being the mother of 2 teenage boys made her realise simply that women cannot have it all. Her article, published in the Atlantic Monthly, started a conversation that continues still to this very day. And as we mark International Women's Day, I'm happy to say that she now joins us from Princeton University. Anne-Marie Slaughter, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
You were serving as Director of Policy Planning for the State Department under Hillary Clinton. You were also the first woman ever to hold that position. Just how difficult was it to walk away from the job?
Well, it's a wonderful job, and it really is. It's the big think foreign policy job. So it was very important as a woman to be holding the job. It was hard to leave, although I stayed for the full 2 years. 2 years is really the minimum that you can do the job and do it well. And as the first woman, I absolutely did not want to leave before 2 years. But the really hard thing was not leaving that job so much as leaving the possibility of being promoted to a higher job. And there are only a few higher jobs, so you can imagine they're all pretty wonderful. And had I stayed in, I was definitely eligible for consideration for those jobs. And that's really what I walked away from. And that was very hard. Those are jobs that anybody in my field would die for, and you know, there's a huge amount of luck in being in the right place in the right time to get them. And I was in the right place, but it wasn't the right time.
Now, you then went on to write about that very difficult decision for the Atlantic Monthly, but the amazing thing was the response to your article. Were you surprised at how people did react?
Yes, I get. It's impossible to describe the speed and magnitude of the reaction. The article went up online on a Wednesday night, and by 2 days later, 400,000 people had visited the website. A week later, that was at 1 million. Now it's at 2 million. It was just stunning. I had no idea. I thought I was writing an article that would be relevant to a relatively small number of women who had been in a similar situation to mine. I did know that younger women thought this conversation needed to be reopened, and I knew that as a foreign policy professional, I had perhaps a unique credibility writing on these issues as someone who was not a professional feminist or student of women's studies. So I knew that I had a few things there that were going to maybe make the article have more impact, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened.
Now, your article also contrasts very much with Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. Now, the Facebook executive advises women to be more assertive with the men, not to hold back, whereas you say the workplace needs to change so that it reflects equitable parenting and so on. Do you think Sheryl Sandberg's argument has merits?
Yeah, Sheryl Sandberg and I are aligned in so many ways. I did critique her in my article. I said that her speech to Barnard was sort of reproaching young women who weren't leaning in. I'm not sure that was fair. I've since talked to many of those young women, and I have seen the impact that Lean In is having on those young women. And it says many of the things I have always said about learning how to assert yourself in a man's world. So I am completely supportive of Lean In. I just think, and I think Sheryl actually agrees with me, that that's not enough. That, yes, it's important for women themselves to do everything they can to advance their careers, but it's also absolutely essential that we change workplaces, that we change the arc of a successful career, that we make it possible for men to pick up a much more equal role at home and as caregivers. Those things are complementary. Sheryl emphasizes one dimension more, and I emphasize the other dimension more. But this is not a fight between us in any way. This is actually, I think, a shared commitment to reopening this conversation and making another round of change.
Now, also in the article, you gave basically what I saw as a sort of a list of guidelines for young women to be strategic about their personal lives. But, you know, is that realistic given the demands of modern workplaces?
So this is exactly what I'm writing my book about, which is to look at the places where we say, you know, plan it right, you know, sequence your career, lean in now and plan for when you're going to lean back later. I do think it's wise to think about those issues, but life rarely unfolds as you've planned it. And many, many, many workplaces, indeed the vast majority of workplaces, still make that very hard to do. In other words, when you have a child or a second child, or maybe you're divorced, or maybe your husband gets a promotion and you have to move, whatever it is, when you actually find yourself in a situation where you can't pursue your career as you had planned, then we are very unforgiving about letting you continue to work part-time and still be on a leadership track, or letting people take time out and then get back in. Those are all the places where no matter how much you personally plan or lean in, you are going to find yourself up against a wall, and that's the wall we still have to break down.
And what about men? I mean, they need to share the load more and also make equally crucial decisions about their personal lives, don't they?
Yes. I strongly believe that the next phase of the women's movement has to be a men's movement. A growing number of men who are equal caregivers, so they and their wives or they and their partners are both breadwinners and caregivers, are finding the same stresses and the same trade-offs if they choose to support their wives by taking up more of the domestic load, then their careers are harmed. So we have got to change this for men as well as women. Men have to speak up. Men have to focus on why it is that they cannot be allowed to be both caregivers and breadwinners. And above all, men have to have the same range of choices that women now have. Women fought for the choices to be both mothers and daughters and wives and sisters, and to be professionals in various ways, and to combine caring for those they love and pursuing the career they love. Men need the same range of choices. It needs to be just as possible for a man to say, you know, I'm going to be home for the next 5 years so that I can be the lead parent for my children, and not have him be stigmatized and regarded as less than fully committed to his career, or indeed as less of a man.
So how does change come about? Do you have to legislate it, or does it happen organically?
Both. I really think the one way to look at this are the way we've changed attitudes around smoking, or the way we've changed attitudes around gay marriage. In both cases, what you see are pushes to change legislation in all sorts of ways, but at the same time, you see enormous cultural change, so that smoking is a good example where it went from being a sign of masculinity to being a sign of weakness, that if you couldn't quit smoking, there was something wrong with you. And obviously, gay marriage went from something that was never talked about or thought about, or it was regarded as deviant, to something that is now regarded as a fundamental right of human beings to be able to love each other. And the kind of change we need, we've had a lot of that change around women. We now need it around men, and we need it around work. So we need to be able to say that someone who pulls back is still absolutely leadership material. So
are we already witnessing a change among younger men, say below the age of 35?
I think so, very much so. My students, when I was still a professor, were increasingly talking, the men as well as the women, trying to think about how they were going to fit work and family together. You now hear students say, I want to be a stay-at-home dad, or I plan to have a fully equal career, and if my wife out-earns me, that's fine. You're seeing those changes come, but they're still, they're very much there among the younger people, but we've still got a ways to go.
Now, you've switched jobs and are now president of a prestigious think tank. Are you finding it easier to juggle everything?
Well, it's certainly easier than when I was in the State Department, working really in Washington 5 days a week and entering the office early and leaving late. I'm still on the road a great deal. My kids would still laugh and say, Mom's definition of being home means being home about half the time. and they're right? I'm still juggling. I'm still on a train a lot. I'm still getting home late so that I can be there in the morning to get them out of bed. But I am able to control my own time. I've always known that I'm a happier person when I'm working and working hard. But I am able to be the kind of mom that I want to be and the best mom that I think I can be, which is a question that every parent answers differently for themselves.
Finally, Anne-Marie, is America ready for Hillary Clinton as president?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's really extraordinary that wherever I travel, because people know that I worked for her, they come up and they talk about how much she has meant to them and how much they would support her. And men say that, maybe not as much as women, but many, many, many men come up and say the same thing. And a remarkable number of Republicans will say to me, look, I'm a Republican, she's a Democrat, but I so admire the job she did as Secretary of State. I so admire her determination, her grit, her service, and her professionalism. So I think America is more than ready for Hillary Clinton.
Anne-Marie Slaughter, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Do stay with us here on Frans van Kat for more news and headlines.